Have you ever set your alarm for 5 a.m. with the best intentions, only to hit snooze, roll over, and wake up hours later feeling like you've already failed the day? You tell yourself you'll try again tomorrow, but tomorrow turns into next week, then next month, and somehow, nothing really changes. Deep down, you know you're capable of more. You're not lazy. You're just stuck in a loop you can't seem to break. And the hardest part? Watching other people move forward in life, while you feel like you're standing still. So let me ask you something honestly. How many times have you promised yourself you'd change and didn't? What if the real difference between where you are today and where you want to be isn't talent, luck, or even hard work? What if it all comes down to something much simpler, something most people ignore every single day? Here's the truth most people never realize. The direction of your life is often decided before the sun even rises. In those quiet, early hours when the world is still asleep, there's a window of time that can either build your future or be completely wasted. No distractions, no noise, just you, and what you choose to do with that time. The question is, are you using it, or are you sleeping through it? This is the story of a man who had nothing, no degree, no connections, no money, just a routine that was slowly destroying his future. He worked hard every single night, yet his life never seemed to move forward, until one morning, everything changed. Not because he got lucky, not because someone handed him an opportunity, but because he made one small, uncomfortable decision and stuck with it. What happened next didn't just change his job, it changed his entire life. And by the end of this story, you might realize something powerful. The same opportunity he had is already in your hands right now. Thomas was 32 years old, and on paper, there was nothing remarkable about his life. He worked as a night security guard at a textile warehouse on the edge of a quiet industrial town. Every evening, just as most people were heading home to dinner with their families, Thomas was clocking in for another long shift. His job was simple: walk the perimeter, check the gates, stay awake, but the hours were draining. Night after night, he lived in silence, watching over a place that wasn't his, protecting assets that would never belong to him. He wasn't unmotivated. He wasn't careless. In fact, Thomas was one of the hardest workers you could meet. But somehow, no matter how hard he worked, his life stayed exactly the same. Thomas lived in a small, run-down apartment that barely felt like a home. The space was cramped, with peeling paint on the walls and a single dim light that flickered whenever the power dipped. A thin mattress lay on the floor, next to a broken fan that pushed around more noise than air. His clothes were worn out, his shoes had holes, and every dollar he earned seemed to disappear the moment he got paid. There was no comfort, no sense of progress, just survival. Some days, it felt like the apartment itself reflected his life. Tired, neglected, and slowly falling apart. This wasn't where he thought he would be at 32, but this was his reality, and he didn't know how to escape it. What weighed on Thomas the most wasn't just his financial situation, it was the feeling of being completely stuck. Every morning, as he walked home from work, he passed by houses where families were just starting their day. He'd see people in clean clothes heading to jobs that seemed meaningful, purposeful, and in those quiet moments, a question would creep into his mind. Is this really it for me? He wasn't lazy. He had tried to change his life before applying for better jobs, thinking about learning new skills, but exhaustion always won. Over time, doubt settled in. Maybe this was all he was meant for. Maybe nothing would ever change. And that thought slowly turned into something heavier, something that felt a lot like hopelessness. Every day of Thomas's life felt like it was stuck on repeat. He worked through the night while the rest of the world slept, then dragged himself home just as the sun began to rise. By the time most people were starting their day, he was collapsing into bed, exhausted and disconnected from everything around him. He would sleep through the afternoon, wake up groggy, eat whatever he could afford, and head right back to work again. There was no time to grow, no time to think, No time to change, just a cycle that kept looping over and over. It wasn't just tiring, it felt like his life was moving in reverse, like he was existing outside of the world instead of being part of it. On his walk home each morning, Thomas couldn't help but notice the lives unfolding around him. Lights turning on in warm kitchens, families sitting down for breakfast, kids laughing as they got ready for school. He'd see men his age stepping out in clean shirts, heading to offices, building careers, moving forward. It wasn't jealousy, it was something deeper, a quiet realization that life seemed to be happening for everyone else, but not for him. He would catch his reflection in a window sometimes, and barely recognize the tired man staring back. And in those moments, a question would echo in his mind. Why does it feel like everyone else is moving ahead, while I'm stuck in the same place? It's not like Thomas never tried to improve his situation. He had applied for better jobs, dozens of them, but without a college degree or specialized skills, the answers were always the same. Rejection. He once signed up for an online course, determined to learn something new, but after a few long nights at work, he just didn't have the energy to keep going. The lessons piled up, unfinished. The motivation faded. Eventually, he gave up. Each failed attempt chipped away at his confidence, making it harder to try again. Over time, he started to believe something dangerous, that maybe he just wasn't meant for more, that maybe effort didn't matter, and that belief began to shape his reality. But the heaviest weight Thomas carried wasn't his job or his failures, it was the quiet disappointment he felt when he thought about his mother. She lived alone in the countryside, working hard even in her old age, always asking the same question during their weekly calls. When is your life going to get better? He would force a smile into his voice and say, "Soon, Mom. I'm working on it." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He wasn't moving forward. He wasn't building anything, and the thought of letting her down, of her never seeing him succeed, hurt more than anything else. It wasn't just pressure, it was a reminder that time was passing, and he was running out of chances to change. One cold morning, just as Thomas was finishing his shift, his phone rang. It was his sister. Her voice was shaking. "Thomas, you need to come home." Mom collapsed. "She's in the hospital." For a moment, everything around him went silent. The exhaustion, the routine, the numbness, it all disappeared, replaced by something sharp and terrifying. He rushed to catch the first bus back to his village, his mind racing the entire way. When he arrived, he found his mother lying in a small hospital bed, pale and weak. The doctor said it was stress, exhaustion, years of pushing her body too far. She needed rest, proper care, and medicine they could barely afford. Sitting beside her, holding her fragile hand, Thomas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: fear. Not just of losing her, but of realizing that his life, as it was, wasn't enough to save the people he loved. Later that morning, after his mother had fallen asleep, Thomas stepped outside the hospital. It was just before sunrise. The air was cool. The streets were quiet. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt still. He checked the time: 5:00 a.m. As he stood there, watching the sky slowly shift from darkness to light, something inside him changed. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. A simple, undeniable thought. I can't keep living like this. No more excuses. No more waiting for the right time. Right there, in that quiet moment, Thomas made a decision. He didn't know exactly how he would change his life, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not go back to the same routine and expect a different result. This was the moment everything began. On the bus ride back to the city, Thomas noticed a man sitting across from him, well-dressed, calm, reading a book as the sun rose. It felt out of place. Most people at that hour looked tired, rushed, half asleep. But this man seemed different, focused, intentional. After a few minutes, Thomas gathered the courage to speak. "Excuse me, why are you up this early?" The man smiled. "Because this is when I build my life." His name was Mr. Chen, a successful business owner in the area. As they talked, he asked Thomas about his routine, his work, his struggles. Then he said something that stuck. "You're not stuck because you're not working hard. You're stuck because you're working at the wrong time." He leaned in slightly. "The hours between 5 and 7 a.m., that's when your future is built." Before getting off the bus, Mr. Chen handed him a card. "Call me if you're serious about changing your life." The next day, Thomas called Mr. Chen. No hesitation this time. When they met, Mr. Chen didn't give him motivation, he gave him a system. "If you want a different life," he said, "you need to take control of your mornings." He explained it simply. Wake up at 5 a.m. every day, no exceptions. Use the first hour to build a skill that can change your income. Not entertainment, not scrolling, real learning. Then use the second hour to build your body and your mind exercise. Read, plan your day. 2 hours a day, Mr. Chen said. That's over 700 hours a year. That's where your new life comes from. It sounded simple, almost too simple, but Thomas realized something he had never truly invested time into himself before. This was his chance. The next morning, at exactly 5 a.m., Thomas's alarm went off. His body immediately resisted. Every muscle felt heavy. His mind whispered, "You need more sleep. Just 1 more hour." For a moment, he almost gave in. His hand hovered over the phone, ready to hit snooze. But then he thought about his mother, lying in that hospital bed. He thought about the years he had already lost, and instead of turning the alarm off, he forced himself to sit up. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel motivating, but it felt necessary. He sat at his small table, opened his phone, and started watching a basic Excel tutorial. He didn't understand much. His eyes were tired, but for the first time in a long time, he was doing something different. The first week was brutal. There's no other way to describe it. Thomas felt exhausted all the time. His body wasn't used to the new schedule, and his mind kept fighting back. Every morning felt like a battle. Some days, he could barely focus on what he was learning. Other days, he questioned if any of this even mattered. Is this really going to change anything? He would think. The temptation to quit was constant. It would have been so easy to go back to his old routine, to sleep a little longer, to stop pushing himself. No one was watching. No one would blame him. But deep down, he knew something had already changed. This wasn't about comfort anymore. This was about survival, about giving himself a real chance. So, he kept going, day after day. No matter how he felt, he stopped negotiating with himself. When the alarm went off at 5 a.m., he got up. No excuses, no delays. Some mornings were easier than others, but he showed up every single time. Slowly, something started to shift. His body began to adapt. His mind became clearer. The lessons that once felt confusing started to make sense. And more importantly, he began to trust himself again. Every completed morning was a small victory. Every hour invested was a step forward. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. But it was real. And for the first time in his life, Thomas wasn't just dreaming about change. He was building it. 1 morning at a time. Around the 3rd week, something unexpected happened. Thomas woke up just before his alarm went off. For the first time, he didn't feel resistance. He felt ready. The lessons that once felt overwhelming were starting to click. He began to understand how spreadsheets worked, how formulas connected, how small pieces of knowledge could solve real problems. It wasn't just about learning anymore, it was about growth. He noticed changes outside of studying too. His mind felt sharper. His energy improved. Even his posture was different. There was a quiet confidence building inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't visible to the world yet, but Thomas knew. He was no longer the same person who hit snooze every morning. By the end of the second month, Thomas had completed his first full online course, then another, and another. Each certificate wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof that he could start something and actually finish it. That alone changed how he saw himself. He wasn't stuck anymore. He was improving, slowly but consistently. He even started looking forward to his mornings, the quiet time, the focus, the feeling that he was finally doing something meaningful with his life. These small wins didn't make him rich overnight, and they didn't solve all his problems. But they did something more important. They gave him momentum, and once momentum starts building, it becomes very hard to stop. In the third month, Thomas decided to take a risk. At work, he noticed that the warehouse had no proper system for tracking inventory. It was messy, outdated, and inefficient. Using what he had learned, he created a simple Excel system to organize everything. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. One day, he showed it to his supervisor. At first, it was just curiosity. Then it turned into surprise. "Wait, you made this?" his supervisor asked. Thomas nodded. "I've been studying in the mornings." That one moment changed everything. For the first time, his effort wasn't just internal, it was visible, useful, valuable. And in that moment, Thomas realized something powerful. The skills he had been building in silence were finally starting to speak for him. Not long after Thomas showed his system to his supervisor, word began to spread. At first, it was just a small conversation between coworkers. And eventually, it made its way to the owner of the company. One afternoon, Thomas was unexpectedly called into the office. His heart started racing. He wasn't sure if he had done something wrong or right. Sitting across from management, he felt out of place, like he didn't belong in that room. But instead of criticism, he heard something he never expected. "We've been looking at what you created," the manager said. "It's simple, but it works, and we need more of that." For the first time, Thomas wasn't being seen as just a night guard. He was being noticed for his value, for his initiative, for the effort no one had seen until now. Then came the moment that changed everything. The manager leaned forward and said, "We're expanding our operations, and we need someone who understands both the warehouse and basic data management. We think you'd be a good fit." Thomas froze. For a second, he couldn't even process what he was hearing. "This would be a day shift position," the manager continued, "with double your current salary." It didn't feel real. Just 3 months ago, he was exhausted, stuck, and invisible. Now, he was being offered a chance to step into something bigger, something better. "When can you start?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. As he walked out of that office, everything felt different. Not because his life had magically changed overnight, but because his effort had finally caught up with him. The early mornings, the discipline, the struggle, it all led to this. And in that moment, Thomas realized something powerful. Success doesn't come from one big break. It comes from showing up when no one is watching. 1 year later, Thomas's life looked completely different. He was no longer working night shifts or barely getting by. He had become one of the most reliable people in the company, handling responsibilities he once thought were out of reach. His income had doubled, then grown even more. He moved out of his small apartment into a clean, comfortable place, and most importantly, he brought his mother to live with him, making sure she finally had the care she deserved. But what truly changed wasn't just his situation, it was who he had become. Every morning at 5 a.m., he still woke up. Not because he had to, but because it was now part of his identity. Those quiet hours were no longer a struggle. They were his advantage, his foundation, the place where he continued to build the life he once thought was impossible. So let me ask you something. What if the life you want isn't as far away as it feels right now? What if the gap between where you are and where you could be is just a few disciplined hours each morning? Thomas didn't have special talent. He didn't have connections. What he had was a decision and the courage to follow through when it was uncomfortable. And now, that same choice is in front of you. Tomorrow morning, when your alarm goes off, what will you do? Will you hit snooze and stay the same? Or will you get up and start building something different? If this story meant something to you, take it seriously. Set your alarm, choose one skill, commit to 90 days, and come back to this moment a year from now. Because your future isn't waiting for the perfect time, it's waiting for your decision.